Join, on the other hand, today for this.
One of the things that I share with the scholars in our program is the thing about leadership is that the times you need to practice effective leadership are almost always the times you don't want to, because somebody is making you upset, because time is of the essence, because the problem is particularly complex or the solutions aren't easily identified.
This is On the Other Hand. A podcast sponsored by Braver Angels Arkansas, where hope and common ground meet.
Each episode features community leaders from Arkansas and beyond, sharing stories and insights on how we can strengthen our relationships and our communities together, and in doing so, discover what's possible.
Hello, and welcome to On the Other Hand. I'm your host, Glen White. I'm here with my co-host, April Chatham Carpenter. On our podcast, as you know, we interview community leaders in Arkansas and elsewhere who are working towards solutions across political or other divides, or who in other ways try to make things better for our communities. So, April, tell us who we have today.
Glenn, I'm very excited that we have someone that I know pretty well, actually, because of his connection to my academic department. This is Dr. Mike Hemphill today on our broadcast. And Mike currently serves as the Senior Director of Leadership Development at the Clinton Foundation. He's also currently serving as the co-director of the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, which is what I think we'll be talking about more today. And for people who don't know, this is an innovative collaboration among multiple presidential centers across the divide: Lyndon Johnson, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush. The program brings together emerging leaders from across a variety of divides, political, professional, geographic areas, and the goal is to strengthen their leadership capacity and really foster collaboration across divides. Before joining this initiative, and this is how I knew Mike, he served as a longtime professor and chair of communication at UA Little Rock, and he also was associate dean of the Clinton School of Public Service. He later became provost and dean of Centenary College in Louisiana. He continues to teach as a professor of practice at the Clinton School of Public Service, and through his work, Mike has really helped develop a new kind of leadership model. You know, it's grounded, we'll see today as we talk to him, in curiosity, humility, and connection across difference. So we're excited to have you on the broadcast, Mike. So welcome to On the Other Hand.
Well, thank you very much. And first, let me just say it's a pleasure to be here with you and Glenn. I really admire the work that you all are doing, and particularly with this podcast. And so thank you for the invitation to be here with you today. I think the only thing I would add is because the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program is a partnership among the presidential centers, I have the opportunity to work every day with a wonderful team from the George W. Bush Presidential Center in Dallas, Texas. And it's been a pleasure to work with them and a real value added to my career. And so that's, I just want to give a tip of the hat to them and a shout out to them.
Oh, thank you. I'm sure that they'll appreciate that. And hopefully you'll share the podcast with them as well so that they can share it with their followers. Well, Mike, you know, I don't know all the background of how you chose to be a professor and then dean and now national program director. I'm curious about what kinds of experiences, maybe or mentors, have shaped your approach and even your pathway into leadership and communication.
So the one thing you need to know about me is my nerd pack has been on a high most of my life. And so I've been really curious about a lot of different things, but really curious about communication, the way people interact with one another, and how meaning happens among us. And it's been a fascinating career, and it's been 48 years. And so there's been a lot of experiences and a lot of mentors that have impacted the way I've approached both the study of human communication and also leadership. I was very fortunate at Arkansas Little Rock as a student to have faculty in the speech communication department that were master teachers in the classroom. And they let me see the value of learning more about communication, but also the importance of sharing that knowledge with other people who need it. And so I think about people like Jerry Butler and John Gray and Steve Runnebaum and Wayne Chapman, All of them had a bigger influence on my career than I know that they realize. And then I was given the opportunity at Arkansas Little Rock at a very young age to become a department chair, and was fortunate to work with a very patient and supportive group of colleagues. And together, we reframed the educational experience in the department in a way that I think really benefited our students, and came up with some ways in which we began to impact their lives, not just in terms of their knowledge of communication, but the way in which they interacted with other people. And so I think those were sort of the early influences that helped shape the way I look at communication and leadership, and really helped shape my career path.
I just had a conversation with a faculty member that was, I think, early on during your time, had started during the time that you were department chair, and he talks about how the foundation that you all built during that time period really has served us, even, with our current mission of co-creating better social worlds through positive communication. Although that wasn't the official mission of the department at that point, it really was the way that you enacted your relationships with each other and with your students. So I appreciate all of that you laid down during that time period. One of the things I've heard you say is that leadership actually isn't something that you do to others, that it actually emerges from those interaction experiences and exchanges. How did you come to that belief?
Well, like I said, I've always been curious about communication. I can remember as a child thinking about how is it that we know what we know inside of our heads? When somebody tells a joke, why do we laugh? How is it we know that it's funny? When someone gives me instructions or directions on how to get someplace, how is it that I end up at the place where I was wanting to get? And I was just fascinated by about the whole idea that we make sense out of our world, by the way in which we attach meaning to it. And I think I have initially framed my understanding of communication around the notion that meaning is individually generated in the brain. And it was a very popular metaphor model that we used to use for communication. It almost made it seem as an isolated event. But then in grad school, I came across an article about a new theoretical perspective called the coordinated management of meaning, and an article that was written by Barnett Pierce and Vern Cronin. And it just transformed my perspective on communication, how we interact with one another, how meaning gets made among and from the interaction of people. And so I began to think more about the importance of looking at how meaning gets made by individuals in conversation. And it's a challenging perspective to take in some ways. And April, as well as anyone, one of the challenges we have in the field of human communication is it's hard to explain such a dynamic, interactive experience in very static terms that we have available to us. And so, but this coordinated management of meaning, now known as the communication perspective, really did transform the way in which I looked at communication and all its various applications. We even had the opportunity when I joined the Clinton School, we invited Barnett Pierce and his wife Kim to come a number of years as guest lecturers. And so I developed a really, just a terrific friendship with them, and was fortunate because they enact in their behavior and the way they interact with other people, they model the principles of people in conversation that are making meaning. So for me, taking that relational perspective, leadership isn't a commodity. Leadership's not something we have. It's not something we wield over other people. Leadership is really about influencing the frameworks of interaction among ourselves and those whom we work with or who we're serving in order to make a meaning that leads to a shared understanding on how to get things done. I mean, that's the perspective that I grew to adopt. And so it's not formulaic. There's no recipe you follow. You have to be intentionally, actively engaged in the interaction to exercise the best leadership.
Yeah, it reminds me of what we talk about in our discipline as co-creation of meaning, that we're doing it with other people. And actually every time we're interacting with someone and we see their reactions and what they say, then we realize if we've really gotten across what we wanted to get across, and we have to adapt it, and they have to adapt theirs, and we're constantly, doing this kind of this exchanging of ideas and checking what's going on for the other person as well. I think one of the things that will be a thread through what we talk about today in our podcast is really, how do we do this kind of meaning making, this co-creation with communication skills productively across our divides. So if I am not even willing to talk to a person, because they are so different from me or they hold different perspectives, then I'm not even going to have that opportunity to co-create meaning. But if I am in that conversation and I'm feeling myself getting, upset, or they're reacting to something that I said, but I didn't intend for it to actually come across that way, there are certain things that I have to step back and do. I'm curious, and I know we'll come back to this maybe multiple times during the interview, but what do you think are the most important communication habits or skills for people who want to engage productively across any kind of divide?
Well, I think there's a couple. One is patience, the patience that, and we're talking about those moments where you just mentioned, when you're in interaction with someone and you can feel the differences, you can feel the impact it's having on you, your emotions are starting to bubble up. One of the things that I share with the scholars in our program is the thing about leadership is that the times you need to practice effective leadership are almost always the times you don't want to, because somebody is making you upset, because time is of the essence, because the problem is particularly complex or the solutions aren't easily identified. And that's a moment in which you need to practice patience. And that patience means letting other people have the floor, hearing other people out. But the patience also means the patience to suspend your own judgment for a while, and really focusing on the importance of understanding the other person. So patience is one thing. I think curiosity is another. Curiosity about other people's stories, letting them share the experiences they've had that have galvanized their perspectives on things. And also recognizing that other people are curious about your story and being willing to share those stories with others. I think another important aspect of all this is reflection. It's not easy. I mean, it's easy to say, be patient, but it's hard to put that into practice. And so I learned this, April, when I was teaching the freshmen, the first year speech course at Arkansas Little Rock, where public speaking was a requirement. And, students just did not want to do that. Most of them did not like getting up in front of the room and giving the speech. And I would see them, so many of my students would get done with that assignment and they go sit back in their desk, and I could just see it in their faces. They were thinking to themselves, thank goodness that's over. I'm never doing that again. And I thought, no, you will be doing that again in your life. And so I started telling my students, listen, when you get done with your speech and you sit back at your desk, you should ask yourself this question: what will I do differently next time? And I would tell them that what this does is you're telling yourself you will do this again. And you're also telling yourself that you can do something different next time. And so the idea of reflection, I borrow from Barnett Pierce again. Many times in my career, I've done this. After a really important interaction where the stakes were high or the outcome was really important, you reflect back on it and you ask yourself, what did we make in that interaction? What was made there? How did we make it? Who was involved? How was the interaction, structured? And then most importantly, how would we make it differently next time? I've been doing not a lot of work. I've been doing a lot of reading the last year and a half on jazz improvisation and how it connects to and what it tells us about effective communication. And so one of the things I've learned is that jazz musicians, especially those that do improvisational jazz, spend a lot of time in reflection, thinking about what did we do in that set last night and where did things go. But the other lesson I've learned from studying musicians is that these are learnable skills. I mean, the point of reflection is not just to do a critical analysis of how the conversation went. The point of reflection is to really guide us in the way we want to change the way we interact with others. And the only way you can do that is by practicing it. So that'd be the last thing I would say. You have to be willing to think about the way you interact with other people, but also be willing to experiment and play with other ways of doing that.
Indeed. The Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, you're co-director of that. So I'm sure our listeners will not know much about that program. Could you tell us what it is, what makes it unique?
So Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, we're starting our 11th year. It's a national leadership development program that's focused on mid-career professionals, generally between the ages of 35 to 45, but some older, some younger, all of whom are established leaders, all of whom are committed to making their communities better, however they define community. And so for some of our participants, their work is focused on the people that live on their street. And for others, it's people in their state or their region or nationally or even globally. It's a deeply heterogeneous group of people that we bring together because the idea was when we first started the program that it was going to be a bipartisan approach to leadership. And so we wanted a lot of different perspectives involved in the program. As April mentioned, it involves the 4 presidential centers, the 2 Bush centers in Texas, LBJ Center, and the Clinton Center here in Little Rock. But it's not a presidential studies program. It's not a policy analysis program. The focus is strictly on the scholars' work and on their leadership. And everything we do is geared towards impacting that. And all I can tell you is it's been the most rewarding thing I've done in my career. I've had an outstanding career, and it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done. And mainly because every year I get to be around a new group of 60 or so amazing people who are dedicated to making the world a better place, and to be involved in an experience that for many of them, their participation in the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, or we call it PLS, their participation in PLS has just been transformative for them. And it's just a joy to be able to witness that every year.
One of the things that struck me when I was reading about this program is how much you emphasize diversity or heterogeneity of each cohort that you bring into the program. So, and you look at, political diversity, professional, geographic, ideological, a lot of that. So just, I guess the basic question first is, why was that diversity so important to the design of the program?
When we started developing the program in 2014, there was a lot of talk and there was a lot of concern about the increasingly polarized environment, not just in politics, but in all walks of life. And I think we were trying to address that in a way that ensured that this leadership program wouldn't become its own echo chamber. And so I share this with people frequently that one of the things that distinguishes our program from others is, although other leadership programs are doing great jobs, but oftentimes they're focused on a particular profession, or they're focused on a particular community that they draw people from. We were very intentional from the very beginning of wanting the most heterogeneous group of people we could bring together, even including, I can remember Bruce Lindsay used to say when we were developing the program, we don't want all the usual suspects in this program. We want to attract people into the program who don't see themselves as people who are normally in a program like this. And I think we've been successful in doing that. It enriches the experience for everyone. And we've learned a lot of valuable lessons about the value of the heterogeneity of the group. But Glenn, the other thing I would say is we're also leveraging the wonderful relationship between President Clinton and President George H.W. Bush and President George W. Bush. And at that time in their post-presidencies, they had created a friendship, a deep friendship and a bond that people were noticing. And early on in the program in particular, I was always surprised at how frequently I would mention the details of the program and people would say how much they enjoyed the nature of that friendship. And so I think we were also in some way honoring what those men had done to develop their friendship and their relationship in a period when everybody was thinking everything's polarized.
Some people listening may hear about the emphasis on diversity and think, oh, that's just another DEI initiative. And, that's getting a lot of attention now. So perhaps you've already addressed that. Is there anything else you'd add to people who might have that way of looking at your emphasis on diversity in the program?
That's a great question, because even using the term DEI now, that label, that word, generates a connotation in a lot of people's minds. And I think depending on your political perspective or on the experience that you've had or the things you read or you watch, it leads you to make inferences about what that really means. I have been most of my career, thanks to Dr. Alan Ward at Arkansas Little Rock, who was a teacher of mine and then a colleague of mine for many years. I recognize the value of going to the fact territory in our interactions with one another. And so for people who think, well, gosh, that's just DEI, I would say this. You label it whatever you want. It's the actual details of the experience of what we do that generates all of the impact. And I think that what we've learned in our program is that when you diversify the group of 60 that come into each cohort, when you maximize the heterogeneity among all of them, then you accrue benefits and advantages that you cannot gain otherwise. And the labeling of it's not as important to us. It's not important to us at all, as much as it is bringing all of those different lived experiences into the same room so that they can be exposed to that. And I should say one of the, so if you think about DEI as something you do because you have to do or you're supposed to do, that's one thing. But if you think about it as an asset, if you think about it as a way in which you can, an asset beyond the normal notion that groups of people make better decisions than individuals, it goes way beyond that. Then I think you start looking at it differently. And that's what's happened for us in PLS, is that we begin to see the advantages of having such a heterogeneous group of folks.
So you talk about the cohort of 60. One of the things that I was curious about that I don't think I had a good sense of when I was reading about it is the recruitment process. How do you decide who gets in? Who do you go to select or say, here, apply to our program? How does that go about?
Early on, we did some marketing of the program, and we're very intentional about the wide variety of groups that we would let know about the program, because we're trying to get the broadest representation in the applicant pool. And we've succeeded in doing that. And then, as is often the case with programs like ours, if you are successful in creating a heterogeneous group one year, then those scholars will tell their friends and other people, and suddenly the applicant pool becomes hugely diverse. I think what's really one of the things that's unique about what we do in PLS is in the selection process, we start with hundreds of folks that apply every year. As we start narrowing down the pool, at every stage, we maximize the heterogeneity of the pool. And I don't know if this will connect with people when they hear this, but and it's something that I learned as a department chair at Arkansas Little Rock, and I used to call it the myth of the best candidate. When you have a selection process, whether you're hiring for a position in your organization or whether you're selecting people into a leadership program like this, there's a tendency to think that, oh, okay, we're going to have 60 people. We have 700 people apply. We're going to pick 60. We'll rank order them from 1 to 700 and take the top 60. Well, we don't do that because we don't believe that there's a best 60 in the group. We believe there's a almost infinite number of groups of 60 that would be outstanding if they were in the program. So that gives us the freedom then at every step to maximize the heterogeneity of the applicant pool and begin to actually create the cohort as we move from 700 to 500 to 250 to the 125 that we interview to the 60 that we ultimately select. And so that's one of the things on the very first day, the very first session of the program, what I share with the scholars is nobody in this room should be thinking they were in the top 60 of everybody that applied to the program because you're not. You happen to be part of these 60 that we picked. And then the other thing that does for us, Glenn, is if you take that approach, then as soon as you place the 60 in the program, your job, your focus becomes making this particular group of 60 the best cohort that it can be. And so really we look at the selection process as just leading up to the opportunity we had then begin working with this group of 60 to make something really special with them. One of the things we diversify on in our program is scale. So scale really doesn't matter to us. So whether your work is involved with just the people that live on your street or in your neighborhood, or whether you're working on a global issue, the only thing that we care about is does the applicant show a commitment to making their communities better in some way? And that community could be, like I said, from their street to the world. That community could be their profession. That community could be their organization they work for. That community could be their customers that they sell products to.
Given the emphasis on diversity and how well it works for you and your group, do you have any thoughts about how a similar focus on diversity and heterogeneity might be helpful with other groups, other projects?
Yes, and I think it goes back to, it actually becomes a little bit of a thread of what we were talking about earlier in terms of interacting with people who have different perspective than you do. What I would say is the only way you're going to get better at that is by actually interacting with people who are differently than you are. And I do believe the research, Glenn, you were talking about earlier that suggests the value of the quality of decision and how it's impacted by groups of people rather than individuals. I also believe that there's real value in the curiosity about the lived experience of other people and the curiosity about how those experiences have shaped their perspective, and being open to the idea that the stories that someone can share with you about their life can change the way you think about things and the way you look at things, and that you can reach a higher level of understanding, still disagree with one another. But the only way that's going to happen is if you put yourself in a situation, if you create a framework or a structure in which there is a heterogeneity of thought, there is a diversity of thought and perspective. And I would say for organizations that are thinking about this, you really need to think about it in two ways. One, in terms of recruitment. And are we recruiting people into our organization that bring a different perspective, that share our common values, but have a different way of looking at the world and thus have a different perspective to contribute to us? And then the second thing is the people within my organization, and that's what I found over the years, is that organizations are much more diverse than we oftentimes give them credit for. And mainly because we get so rooted, so habitual in the way we approach things that we can exclude groups of people, or we can exclude these different opinions without even realizing that's what we're doing, which takes me back to the idea of reflection. And I just think it's really important at times for us to stop and just ask, how are we making meaning in this organization right now? Who are the people who are contributing to it the most? Who are people that could be contributing to it if we just gave them that opportunity? And then be willing to have the courage to do that sort of thing. And Glenn, I would say that it goes back to that notion of you have to believe that it's an asset. You have to believe that there's real value in that. And it's not just something you're doing to check the box or appear to be, right-minded about something. It really is about, I see the value in taking this approach.
That's it for part one of our conversation today with Mike Hemphill. We'll pick things up right where we left off in our next episode, so be sure to join us for part two.
If you liked what you heard today, share the episode with a friend and help us spread stories of bridge building across Arkansas. And remember, On the Other Hand offers dozens of other interviews like this one. You can find On the Other Hand in your favorite podcast app or on the podcast page of the Braver Angels Arkansas website at arkansas.braverangels.org.
Thanks for joining us for this first part of today's conversation with Mike Hemphill. We hope Mike's story gave you a little more hope and a reminder that we can do good things together.
On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels Arkansas, a community of citizens working together to bridge the partisan divide and build a stronger, more connected Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
From your host, April Chatham Carpenter,
And Glen White.
join us in working to make our relationships and communities better.